Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome to our playthrough of Final Girl. It's a little bit outside of the historical board games that we normally play on the channel, but it does involve combat and plenty of action, so I think we will find it still pretty entertaining. Now, if you're not familiar with the Final Girl series, in this game you play the final female protagonist in a horror film fighting against a classic villain. There are a lot of different modules and locations and protagonists you can play. I'm new to the game, so we're going classic. We're going to pick Hans the Butcher. 7 foot tall, wielding a 50-pound sledgehammer. He's the ultimate epitome of evil. For our protagonist, our final girl, we're going to choose Laurie, the classic Series 1 protagonist. And we're going classic with the location as well, Camp Happy Trails, where all your summer dreams come true. Let's jump in and get started. Okay, so everything's pretty much set up for us to dig in and get started. And just to clarify, if you're new to this series, this is a solo game. So we are Laurie. Our goal is to kill Hans. Hans's goal is to kill us. There's only one of two possible outcomes. We win by killing Hans. Hans wins by killing us. Now, this looks a little bit complicated visually. There's a lot going on, but it's actually really straightforward. Laurie down here, our protagonist, we use cards for her to take actions. We'll talk about how that works. So we're going to be picking things like guard or search or sprint or furious strike when we're in combat with the Hans here, Hans the Butcher. So we'll talk about more about as we get into it. This little graphic display here is kind of critical to gameplay. I'll explain that in a moment as well. Up here is Hans's area. We'll take a look at that. And then over here is Camp Happy Trails. We'll take a look at that in turn. Let's first start by looking at Laurie. Down here is Laurie's card, and we can see that it's basically just a picture of her with these 6 little spaces here. There are victims in the game, and every time we can save a victim, we'll talk about how that works, we put one of them here, and we get a little bit of a bonus. So saving other campers that could be potential victims of Hans is a way for us to get stronger, because if we save all 6, we flip this over, and we get this special bonus ability, which is whenever you are in same space as an enemy and inflict damage, we do an extra damage point. So this is kind of Laurie enraged. So one of our goals is going to be try to save 6 victims if we can, so that we power up Laurie. Now, the game works with hit points. Both Laurie and Hans have hit points. Laurie has 5 hit points. 4 of these are regular hit points. This 5th one here is a mystery hit point. We'll talk about that when we get there. This area I'll come back to as we start acting out of our turns. And here is Hans. For the moment, we don't have to know too much about him other than he's got 12 hit points. He's got 11 regular hit points and 1 kind of mystery hit point that we don't know yet. We'll talk about that. Right here is one of his actions, and we'll talk about those as we go forward. And then over here really is the chart that tells us how he moves and how much damage he does. This down here, this little marker, is called Bloodlust. And Bloodlust, right now, it starts down here at the lowest level. We look across to see that when he's at Bloodlust is 0 with a low level here, he moves 1 square and he does 2 damage when he attacks. Every time a victim dies, no matter how they die, Bloodlust is going to go up by 1. And this is going to change it eventually. If a lot of victims die and you get up in here, Hans is moving twice as fast and he's doing more damage. And if you get up in here, things are really in trouble. He's moving 3 spaces and hitting with 5. So as he kills more and takes out more campers, his bloodlust and his rage goes up and he becomes ever more powerful. So that's another reason for us to save victims, because every time a victim dies, his bloodlust is going to go up. And there are other ways his bloodlust can go up too, but that's the basics of it for right now. And here we have Camp Happy Trails, where our drama will unfold. Now, we've got 3 different types of meeples here. The red meeple here is Hans. He's actually starting in the lake, which is got a sledgehammer traipsing through the lake. Over here is Laurie. That's us. We're over here by the tennis courts hanging out. And then all of these yellow meeples are our other campers. They are called victims in the game. They don't behave very intelligently. And again, when Hans kills one, his bloodlust goes up and his rage, he gets more powerful. If we can save one, we get benefits and we become more powerful. So not only are we trying to kill Hans, we're trying to balance killing Hans with saving victims, and Hans is doing all kinds of nasty things to the victims. Now, the game starts, there's a number of different startups that you can have with these little startup cards. You pick one of these randomly. We got Meditation Hour. which means that all of the campers have gone off and they're assigned to be alone by themselves for the most part in all these different places on the map. So we can see our number of victims are scattered all about, except for these two people up here who are up at Makeout Point. Apparently they're not supposed to be there, but yeah, they're out at Makeout Point as a pair. The other thing to note here is that we start the game with nothing, just ourselves. We don't have any weapons, we don't have any useful items or anything like that. But up here at the utility shed, there's this little wrench. Down here at the dock, we see this little wrench. And then over here at the cabins, there's this little wrench. Those are places where we can search for items. And we know what the first items are at these locations. At the cabins, we have a flashlight. At the dock, we know somewhere around there is going to be an aluminum bat. Someone left it there. And then in the utility shed, we've got some fireworks that could serve as a distraction to Hans. So one of the goals that we might want to also try to do is to think about how we can get to the cabins, the dock, or the utility shed, search around and see if we can find something that's going to make us stronger. Because ideally, we're going to need some kind of weapon to do more damage to Hans when we get in combat with him. And with all that being said, we're pretty much ready to start. I think we can explain everything else as we go along, but let's first go over here and take a look at one last thing, which is we have an event deck and we're going to pick our first event. The last thing we need to do as part of the setup is to pick our event. This is a whole deck of event cards, so we're going to pick one randomly from the top. Certain other things in our adventure could trigger another event. Some of these are good and some of these are bad. Yeah, this is bad. Okay, so we're not off to a good start luck-wise. Death Wish. Basically, it means during the upkeep phase, so at the end of the turn, you do all kinds of little upkeep things before you go to the next turn. It says, move the victim closest to Hans one space towards him. Do not count victims currently in the same space as Hans. So that means at the end of each turn, the victims are going to check out Khan. They want to go take a closer look and see what he looks like. Yeah, see what I mean? These victims are not the brightest. So yeah, that is definitely a death wish. Let's go see what this guy with the 7-foot guy with the sledgehammer looks like. Okay, anyway, so that's going to make things a little bit harder for us. With all that being said, let's come up with some kind of a plan. Now, a disclaimer. I've played the game twice before this. The first time I didn't know what I was doing. The second time, I got Hans about halfway down before, yeah, Laurie was bludgeoned to death. So I've never won at this game, and we're kind of new at it. So don't look for this as a strategy guide, but here's my thinking. We're over here in the tennis courts. Fortunately, Hans is way over on the other side of the camp. He's in the lake. He is surrounded by all these victims, though, which means they're going to be kind of meat. And there's not much I think we can do depending on which way Hans goes in the first turn. So we might want to see if we can save these 3 victims down here and then perhaps get up here to the cabins where there is a flashlight and see if we can find that flashlight and maybe some kind of a weapon. And then we'll see what goes on after that. I want to kind of stay away from Hans and see if we can save some of these other victims. But yeah, the way they're scattered about on this kind of the right side of Camp Happy Trails, I think he's going to have a lot of sledgehammer victims before we can help them out. This could go ugly fast. We know that we want Laurie to get moving and start saving some victims on the west side of Camp Happy Trails while we see what Hans does on the other side. So the question is, how do we do that? And we know that we talked earlier, we're going to use these cards to take actions. Now, the cards really can be in roughly speaking, one of 2 conditions. Either the card is in our hand, which means that we can play it, or the card is part of this menu of cards that we don't own yet. So we have to kind of bring these actions into our hand in order to be able to play them in a turn. As we start the game, however, we start the game with these 6 very basic actions. These are our starter cards. Let's take a look at these. So here is our starter hand. We've got 6 actions. We get 2 walks, we got 2 focuses, we got a weak attack, and we have a short rest. And there's these 3 different outcomes for each card, and you might be wondering, okay, how do these work? Basically, we have to roll dice to see if we are going to be successful. And let's take a look at our dice. There are 6 dice in the game, and we're going to roll a certain number of the dice each time we try to take an action. There are 3 states that a die can be in. A 1 or a 2 means a total fail for that particular roll. A 3 or a 4 is a partial fail. We'll talk about that. A 5 or a 6 is a star, which is successful. So if when we roll our dice, we can get 2 successes, we can do this green action, which is a big, more powerful action. If we get 1 star on our die rolls, we can do this middle action. And if we don't get any stars at all, we fail, and the consequences usually aren't very good. Now, you might be wondering, what is this one in the middle here? This is kind of a partial success. If we get one of them here, we can turn this into a star by discarding 2 cards that we haven't used yet from our hand. So say, for example, we're rolling 2 dice and we get a star on a walk, and we get one of these like that. We get a 6 and a 3, we get a star. So we've already got the blue one. If we want to make it green, we can throw away 2 of these other cards, turn this one into a star, and we can move up to 2 spaces with the walk. Now the question you might be asking, if there's 6 dice, how do we know how many to roll? That's where the horror level comes in. Let's go take a look at that. To start with our discussion on the horror level, we have to look at Hans. And besides this little hockey mask thing, this is representative, this is the icon for horror level, we see this little 4. That means the current horror level is 4. Now our mystery dial here starting to make a lot more sense. We see this other red meeple here. This represents Hans on the horror track here, right? We put this on the number 4. When it's on the number 4 and we take an action, we roll 2 dice. Now you'll notice this is a dial. The horror level is going to change. Certain actions that Hans take will increase the horror level, and certain actions that we take are going to decrease the horror level. And basically, if the horror level gets all the way up here past 6, we're freaking out. We're totally dysfunctional, and we can only use 1 die. If we can get our act together here and get the horror level all the way down to 1, we are super efficient, ruthless, we're coldly calculating. We can roll 3 dice, which is going to give us a much greater chance at succeeding in our actions. So that's basically how this horror part of the dial works. So we know that at the beginning of the game, we're going to roll 2 dice, and then it's going to shift about later. And hopefully we can at least stay in the 2 die. You're pretty much toast, I think, if you're down here in this 1 die level. It's really hard to do anything at all. The other thing, the last thing that we need to know, mechanic-wise, is this little time measure here. This is an hourglass, and it starts at 6. The time is both what we use to kind of, as a result of some of the actions we take, but it's also the currency we use to buy action cards. So in our turn, we're going to take a bunch of actions. Some of them will take time, some of them won't take time. We can stop any time we want to as in our part of our action phase of our turn. And as soon as we take actions, however much time is left over, so if we took some actions and ended up with 3 time, that's how much time we can use to buy our cards for our next turn. And if we just look at some of these cards here, we can see, for example, to buy this retaliate card, we need to have 4 time left over at the end of a turn. To buy a search, we need 2. To buy this close call over here, we need 1. So we're constantly going to be balancing in our turn, which consists of 2 parts. We take all our actions, and then after that, it's a planning phase for the next turn where we buy our cards to replenish our hand. So you're constantly trying to balance taking actions with preparing for the next turn. And with all that being said, we have learned everything we need to know in order to be able to get started with our actions. We know we want Laurie to get busy, so we're going to pick the walk action. Let's put this up in the play area and see how this goes. I should say too that there are 5 phases in the game. The first 2 are our action phase and our planning phase. Then the monster is going to go. Then there could be a panic phase and then a cleanup phase. And we're just going to cycle through these rounds until the end of the game. All right, so we're going to have Laurie try to walk. She can't even run yet. She's got basic actions, but she's starting to get going here. So we're going to roll the dice and let's see how we do. Come on, Laurie. Let's see if you're off to a good start here. Laurie is not off to a good start. We got 1 failure and we got 1 that we could use to move up 1 space. Now, right now we're at 2 failures. We could move 1 space, but we would lose one of our 5 health already, and it's going to take 2 time. So that's kind of a bummer. Instead, I think what we're going to do is let's spend 2 cards here. We're going to spend weak attack because I don't think we're going to need that yet. And we're going to spend short rest. And we are going to turn one of our failures, one of the 2 die rolls, into a success. And that will allow us to move 1 space at the cost of 1 time. So let's go move a space. I think what we're going to do first is try to come down here and save these 2 victims. So Laurie can move 1 space, and the spaces are connected by these little walkways and numbers and stuff like that. So we can see these 2 are connected, so we can just move Laurie 1 right here. She's now found this victim, and she's like, okay, come with me. And how it works is victims will tag along with you when you move. You can have 2 victims tag along with you wherever you go. And to save them, you'll notice that there's this little green exit door here, here, and here. If we take a victim there, we can have them leave the game, leave Camp Happy Trails, and they have been saved. So we've got our first successful, semi-successful, it really wasn't very successful, she didn't walk very effectively, but we're in business. Let's see if we can walk again. One thing we have to do before we do that though, we'll notice on this one success, moving one space costs us 1 time, this little red icon. So we're down to 6 time, down to 5 time right now. All right, Laurie, let's walk again, be successful. Oh man. So no successes, but we could use our last 2 cards to get her to move 1. I really don't want to lose a health and burn 2 cards. And I really wanted to do this focus action, but I don't want to totally fail. Laurie is not off to a good start here. Come on, Laurie, get your act together. We are going to burn our last 2 cards here, and there's 2 focus cards. We're not using those. So again, we will move 1 space and burn 1 time. So Laurie goes over here to the fire pit. We'll take this person with us for now, just in case something goes sideways here. So we've got 2 people with us. We're at the fire pit. Now we're going to try in the next turn to try to get them out of here. That action also cost us 1 time. So we're down to 4 time, and we have no cards left. We've used all our cards, so we can't take any more actions. That means it goes into the planning phase, and we have 4 time points to which we can spend. So now it's our currency to buy new cards. So we have 4 time increments to spend. We definitely want sprint, right? Because we want to run, we want to move around and stuff like that. So we're going to buy that. That costs 2. So that we got 2. And I think as much as I'd like to buy another sprint, I don't want to fail with that, and we don't seem to be doing that well. So let's buy these 2 close calls, which allows us to re-roll a die or re-roll all 2 dice, and they cost us 1 each. So the next turn is actually not going to be all that great. We're only going to have 3 cards, but it's the best we can do. Now to clean up, we spent our 4 time, taking us all the way down to 0. At the end of this phase, what we do is we move the time marker back up to 6 to reload for the next turn, and then we take all the cards that we played and we put them back in their respective piles. Now the 0 cost cards we can always get back. The other ones we have to buy back again. So that finishes our turn. Now it's time for Hans to move. Now that we're done with our actions and planning, it's time for Hans to get busy. Now Hans has an initial action that he always does, which is if he is in, this is say his target, and attack him. But this doesn't involve any movement, so he's not in a space with anybody right now, which means that he's not gonna move, he's not gonna do anything. That doesn't apply to him. So let's talk about how Hans moves. Hans's actions after that initial attack, if he's in the same space as someone, is dictated by this terror card deck. There are 10 cards in the deck, and we are going to flip them over. And when they are all gone, Hans, it kind of moves into a power mode. So we are kind of a little bit pressed by time here. Let's see what the first terror card says. Hans wants me. He's always wanted me. Okay, so the icons here means he's coming for us. He's moving for us, he's gonna move twice, and then he's gonna attack us if he's in the same space as we are. So let's see what that means on the board here. All right, so Hans is targeting us, and he's gonna move 2 spaces and then attack us. Now he's in the lake, so he rises up out of the lake, he comes past the dock here. There is this petrified victim here, just seeing this massive 7-foot guy lumber out of the lake with his sledgehammer. The action, the horror is underway here, but he's gonna go directly past them, even though they are frozen with fear. Come into this clearing, he's heading right for the fire pit. Now he will attack, but there's nothing there. Now, even though he's targeting us, if there were a victim here, he would attack them because there's nothing else to attack. But fortunately for us, that actually didn't work out all that badly. However, we really better sprint in the next turn here. We gotta get some distance because this one is only 1 away. Oh my gosh, we gotta get out of here, right? So, but who knows? Maybe he'll go somewhere else the next turn. Maybe he'll lose his focus or something. But Hans is coming right for us with this sledgehammer. We don't have a weapon. We've got 2 victims with us. We're at the fire pit. Come on, Laurie, we gotta go. Okay, so, oh, that's right. I forgot. We have one thing to talk about too. So Hans is done. That's his move is all finished. There's nothing else for him to do. There's no attacks and things like that. Now we go to the panic phase. The panic phase only happens if someone dies, a victim dies, and there's a victim in the same space as the killer. That's not the case, so we passed the panic phase. Now we go to the upkeep phase, and I forgot, we have the Death Wish event. The Death Wish event means that we have to move the victim closest to Hans into the same space as Hans is, or closer to him. Yeah, move 1 space towards him. Oh my gosh. Okay. Now, this is ambiguous, right? We have 3 potential victims here. They all are closest to Hans. In a game ambiguity case, it says there are 3 ways you can resolve it. The way that we're going to resolve it is with what's called the rule of infinite evil. We are going to resolve the ambiguity in such a way that it results in the worst outcome for you, which means we're going to take one of these people with us and they're going to wander over and check it out. It's like, oh, what is that thing? Let's go see. Oh no. So we would have potentially saved them, but now they're going to get their... Yeah, because next time Hans moves... Well, I mean, we could still save him. We could sprint, right? We could be like ultra bold here. We could potentially sprint up here, get the victim to come with us, go past and come over here to the clearing, and then they would be able to leave, and then we could keep going. Oh, that would be a bold move. Anyway, okay, so that's the end of the first round. And with that, we've gone about 20 minutes on this video, so I'm gonna leave it here. The next turns will go a lot faster. We have this dramatic moment here where the victim wanders over to Hans. Will she die or will she survive? Can we still save them? We'll be back in episode 2. I'll put a link to it as soon as it's ready. Thanks for watching, everybody. Questions happily entertained.